Cool. Yep.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bytes of Good Live. If you don't already know, this is our monthly speaker series hosted by Hack for Impact, a student-run nonprofit with the goal of inspiring the next generation of technologists, designers, and humanitarians to develop software for good. Today, we have chapters across the country and even in Canada. Bytes of Good Live is an opportunity to engage in a larger conversation on how to critically examine the roles that technology plays in our society and be able to actually explore potential career paths in the social good space. And if anyone's interested in learning more about the podcast and some of the other programs that we have, you can find all of our past talks and our podcast as well at bytesofgood.org. So with that, today we are joined by Kevin Huang to speak about Bridges for Enterprise and their student-led team that supports over 100 social enterprises in the developing world, building community-based solutions that last. We'll start up with introductions, learn a little bit about Kevin's experience in social impact, focus tech consulting, and then we'll go into a bit of a moderated Q&A, some question and answer, and then we'll open up for questions from the audience. So please feel free to send any questions that you may have throughout the event in the chat, and we'll make sure to catch those. And with that, I can pass it on to Kevin to introduce yourself.
Thanks so much, Zaria. Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Huang. I'm a PhD student studying machine learning, currently based in London, and I'm also the head of technology at Bridges for Enterprise, the organization we'll talk a bit about later. I personally, I prefer people calling me a statistician rather than a computer scientist, even though through Bridges for Enterprise, I actually had the chance to sort of dabble with software development, a bit of database DevOps stuff. So I'm really excited today to talk to you about the experience that I have through Bridges for Enterprise, and maybe talk to you about what tech consulting means, and hopefully answer some of the questions about this space.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kevin. So I guess to get started, would love to hear more about just what Bridges for Enterprise is and the work that you all do.
Definitely. So Bridges for Enterprise is a global nonprofit providing pro bono advisory services to social enterprise startups in the developing world. And I know there are a lot of adjectives here, but to put it into a better context, so we started as a student-led organization in 2015 in Cambridge. So pretty much like Hack for Impact itself. And when we were first founded, we were basically trying to get students and professionals across the UK to come together to volunteer for providing consulting services to social enterprise startups. Because we realized that these are the startups that are running a for-profit model that's trying to get on their own feet and being sustainable. And they are also startups that are helping to address a lot of important issues, social issues in the world that are not addressed somehow because of lack of resources. And we have chosen to focus on the developing world specifically because those are places where there's no existing regulations, legal or financial structures to incentivize social enterprises. After that, we quickly escalated into a global organization. Currently, we are based both in the UK as well as in Singapore, US, Canada, very recently India. And we have worked with over 100 startups worldwide to deliver social impact across areas such as energy, education, employment, gender equality, and more. We also have quite a wide variety of consulting services that we provide to startups, covering business, finance, legal, and most notably, what I'm going to be speaking about today, technical advisory.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for that brief introduction. I love hearing more about the work that you all do at Bridges for Enterprise, and especially how much it sort of mirrors what our mission is at Hack for Impact. So we love that. So cool. I'd love to hear some more about your role with the internal tech volunteer team and how that sort of differs from the general work that you do with external consulting.
Definitely. So I've been involved in BFE for the past 5 years or so, and I was actually kind of fortunate in getting involved in both the internal and external teams. As Zara mentioned, my current role as the head of technology basically involves leading our internal technology volunteer team, and that is to look at internal technological solutions that can help scale the organization and empower the work we do. And that's typically done through data analytics projects where, for example, we look at social impact data that we have created through our services. That's through algorithm projects where we may employ algorithms to automate some of the decision-making processes in the organization. And we also have a huge software development team that's looking at building internal tech tools, platforms that can connect all the clients, mentors, and students we have across the world together. So that's a bit about the internal team. On the other hand, we also have the external team as an consulting organization. So for that, our projects are run pretty much in a similar way to how Hack for Impact runs. We have projects catering to different startups that we serve, and it's based on sort of the tech requests raised by the startups. We also have our sort of own ground rules in what projects we take. For example, we stick to projects that only improve upon the existing tech products in the startup, or projects that help startups research on potential tech solutions to their products. So we never we try to avoid the case where our students, volunteers build an entire product on its own and hand it over to the enterprises. And we sort of keep our hands at the advisory level. I can go into a bit more comparison between two teams, but I think we can save that for later.
For sure. Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much for that description of the sort of different sides of the house that you work on with Bridges for Enterprise. A lot of the projects that I know that I've spoken with you about previously are incredibly cool, and hearing the impact that it has on the local level for a lot of these communities. I'd love to hear some more about some of the social enterprises that you all have partnered with and you advise through your work.
Definitely. So before I go into that, I guess I was thinking, instead of giving you just a laundry list of here's startup A and we did this, and that's startup B and we did this, I think it's easier for us to put things into perspective by saying, first of all, what tech consulting means to me and what it means to BFE. So I think if you're a tech consultant, as many of you are in Hack for Impact, people come to you for several reasons, right? One is that people may come to you because they don't have a tech team, or they have a really small tech team that's building minimal stuff, and they know there's a gap for the product. So that's the case where your clients are facing a lot of resource constraints. And I believe that's the case for Hack for Impact, for example, where a lot of your clients are charities. You can also have really advanced tech startups, or startups that really know tech, that come to you. And they want your advice because as a tech consultant, you are the person who are exposed to a lot more different companies, different situations than they do, where they've just been spending their life working on a single problem setting. So they may want to come to you and try to understand from you how different companies in the same sector are doing things. They may also come to you because they have an existing sort of like tech team that's specializing in certain areas, but they want to sort of go into another area, and that's where they want someone to help them do sort of like research on. So some people tell me, I mean, even so, when we first started tech consulting in BFE, and even now, there are people, internal and external, questioning whether there's a real need for tech consulting. Because I think there's some misconception but somewhat commonly believed idea that if you are a startup, especially if you are a startup based on technology, your startup owner must know 100% how the technology works, and you must know the technology must be sort of foolproof in order for you to push it out to investors. To a large extent, yes, when you look at some of the large companies, but I would personally argue that, again, as someone who's starting a company, you typically don't have that time and network connections to know about how your technology compares to other companies and what are the potential areas that may be improved. And that's why we believe there's a real need for tech consulting. That's actually exactly why we realize that tech consulting is the missing piece of puzzle in our advisory program for startups. So given all this context, I think it's a bit easier for me to talk about different types of TA projects that we had in BFE. So we have one project, for example, 2 years ago. There's an Indian telemedicine startup, and they were offering remote psychiatric services, low-cost services to low-income people who often do not have access to this. The tech sort of request they raised to us was that they want to explore machine learning-based solutions to assist with predictions. So they're wondering whether through appropriate data collection, we can use some sort of models to assist the psychiatrists who have to see a lot of patients through their platform to make sort of good initial prediction on the psychiatric conditions. And so that's an example of when why I said they have a bunch of software developers already maintaining their platforms. They don't have people in the knowledge of machine learning, and they come to us for that. And then we also have the other kind of startup. So there's this Tanzanian agriculture startup that's building big machineries for spreading fertilizers in the farm. And the sort of social take on that was that a lot of people are using chemical fertilizers in Tanzania that's causing a lot of soil erosion. And their machinery basically helps to spread organic fertilizers easier and makes it sort of like more easier for farmers to adopt. They already have a good machinery that's being used across the villages. And when they come to us, they basically said they want us to help redesign and improve the machinery. And in that particular case, that's what I meant by this founder himself was the one who engineered the whole machinery, and they have a team of people who know that, but they want to get perspectives from people outside Tanzania and also from comparable companies. So what we end up doing was the team look at a few parts of the machinery, help them improve it, even explore the potential of using more sustainable materials. And yeah, so maybe I will pause here and save some examples for Q&As.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. I loved hearing about those two different, I guess, interactions with these social enterprises and just how important advising is, or tech advising specifically, in helping them actually realize the impact they can make on the local community and the work that they can do. That's really powerful. Thank you so much for sharing. This sort of work that I'm hearing doesn't seem like your typical tech consulting that we oftentimes hear about. So what would you say you've learned or taken away from your experience with these social enterprises, working with them in the developing world?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in some sense, I think tech consulting itself is still a really new and emerging field. And I mean, there's a very broad definition of tech consulting that varies from company to company. I think over the past 2-3 years of building tech consulting in BFE, what we've come to consensus to is that one, I think, so I mentioned how we insist on not building a new tech product on its own and passing it to others, because we believe that it's more important to teach them how to fish rather than just give them the fish. And also, like, if we have a really advanced tech team that builds a product that we believe is totally going to work. And we pass it to a team of a company that doesn't have the manpower resources to maintain it. It will just be another thing that gets cast aside by the client.
Right.
So one thing that, at least at BFE, I think we value a lot is to do the minimum work that delivers the most impact to our clients. And I think also this is something that's quite different between sort of like pro bono consulting and like corporate for-profit consulting. Because I think if you work when you work in like a big consulting company, so I guess it's not as advertised, but it's something that you will soon realize if you join a consulting company that when first of all, a lot of your clients are big companies. They have internal teams that already sort of look at the issues, and sometimes they come to you with a pre-existing stance. Also, as a consulting company that sort of takes money from your client to offer advice, when you are, I guess, constrained by various reasons, various realistic or pragmatic reasons, maybe the optimal solution for you is just to provide some advice that's vague, passable, that allows you to basically get the job done, but then waiving all responsibilities on the claim. I mean, we also do that at BFE as a consulting company. We also waive all responsibilities we have on the things that we provided them. But I think having the sort of monetary incentives taken away from us, one thing that we were able to do so much more in BFE is to have very independent opinions, however controversial it is, and have a very sort of open and transparent discussion with the startups. So I think that's always important, and that like applies to all consultings, but also more in tech consulting, where I think you are in a situation where the truth of the matter really matters. It's, oftentimes you get into things that are quite black and white compared to just business problems. Another thing that I think we value a lot in tech consulting, and I guess also in BFE, how we distinguish people in technical advisory versus people in internal tech, is that technical consulting, technical advisory to us boils, I think 50% of the time needs to be spent on client communication. It's so much more important to understand the client's problem thoroughly and understand what's the root of the issue, compared to building something that's really fancy, that you feel a lot of like self-achievement for, but that ends up not working. So I mentioned the example just now about a machine learning sort of project that we did, and we used to have another one as well. For both projects, we started, that was in the very early stage of tech consulting, and I think we started with the idea that we learned so much about machine learning in our university. It sounds really cool, and here's a cool startup that wants to use it. We are going to build something, and that's going to like change their business model forever. And at the end, surprisingly, all the deliverables we have for the startups were not codes, but were pages and pages of research reports, just like typical business consultants. And that's because I think like machine learning is a very prime example of something that I think you get a lot of satisfaction at building it because it's so cool and new. But it's the technology itself is often not as in touch with what's on the ground yet. And especially in our case, when we are dealing with developing countries, you face the issue of very, very limited data, corrupted data, or lack of means to collect data properly. So when the clients come to us, we would often end up realizing that it's going to take a lot more time for them to collect the data that's needed to have a working model, let alone tuning a model specifically for that client's purpose. So what we ended up laying out for the client is often a roadmap saying that, okay, if you want to opt for a more data-driven solution, here are the kind of data that you should start considering collecting. These are the more important ones. These are the less important ones. If you do go for a machine learning solution, here are some models, state-of-art models out there that you can use. Just download their code and plug that in without any hassle. if you don't want to go for machine learning models, there are also classical ways that can help you achieve things you want without throwing a black box into your product. So I think that the experience with working with those ML research projects gave us a really huge alarm on basically controlling expectations, both on the startups end and our end, and really getting to the ground about what's most important. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I feel like that's something that is especially very interesting to me, hearing about how to overcome these sort of infrastructure issues with that may be barriers to this sort of technology. And is, as you mentioned, it's very exciting being able to work on these super flashy technical projects, but what actually is addressing the need at the end of the day and how to identify that. That's really special. Thank you. Cool. You mentioned a bit before about the differences between working with this sort of pro bono or, like you mentioned, without the profit incentive consulting versus working for a larger consulting organization. Do you have any advice for members of Hack for Impact or anyone viewing who may be interested in consulting and be really passionate about making that impact, but maybe is afraid of maybe the lack that they may face in the traditional consulting route?
Yeah, sure, definitely. I mean, first of all, word of clarification, I am currently in the academia, so whatever I say is going to be my personal opinion. That's not representative of anything. It's mostly through, I think, people I've interacted with in BFE and people I know in London who's working in the sector. But yeah, I think, so it's a really interesting question. First of all, tech consulting is really new, and impact consulting is also really new. So I think there may be some tech for impact consulting companies out there, but I think most of them exist as a special team as part of the large companies, and there's a good reason for it because it's expensive to hire tech people. I think we all know it. And to have like a fully for pro bono sort of organization doing that is quite expensive. So I think my first advice would be you don't need to be afraid of joining a large consulting organizations and feeling that you're just going to be put into silo all the time, because I know that now more and more consulting companies are, even though they are doing a lot of their traditional stuff, they are having their consultants going out there to do pro bono projects once every year. That's initiatives in those companies that my friends have been to. ESG consulting is something that's on the rise. So environmental sustainability, because now young generations are more conscious of this kind of things, and the sort of consulting financial industry is catching up with that as well. So if your expertise happens to be in, say, data analytics or machine learning, so things that can be applied more broadly to businesses, those are also areas that you can think about. Second of all, I think I would advise people to think carefully about the kind of impact you want to create, and also what impacts you want to create, not just now, but in the long run. Because you may not, as a tech person, you're actually kind of flexible. So you may not even need to start your career in tech consulting straight away. The benefits of being in tech consulting is that you get exposed to a lot of different clients and cases instantly. So maybe this 2 months you are looking at a client management system for a traditional oil company or whatever, and next month you are looking at some cloud infrastructure issues for that startup. So your problems change very often. That means you have a lot of breadth at the start, but that also costs you in terms of the depth. Because and that's because one, you spend your time on something for just a few months and then you switch away. And secondly, it's also when the companies come to you, that usually means they lack the more technical people to handle this issue. And within a consulting company, at least for most tech consulting branches of consulting companies right now, there are very limited people as well. Like one person is usually kind of expected or asked to do multiple things at the same time. So maybe you are looking at front end and UI and database at the same time, which is not the case in a tech company itself. So starting a career in tech consulting directly, you would, I personally would argue that it would sort of push you towards the more business consulting route. And that's obviously going to create a lot of impact in terms of the volume of people impact. But on the other hand, if you want to really build a specialization in something, and you want that maybe the impact you have in mind is to create clean, accessible user interface for all sorts of people under like all network conditions or whatever, maybe you want to start your career in a traditional tech company first that's building in their internal team, because usually that's the team with a lot more senior people who have spent years focusing on a single area. And that's where you can sort of build your specialization. And it's never too late to, I guess, switch then back to consulting when you are in your 30s and more in a tech lead managerial kind of role. And I mean, there are cons as well. Like, obviously, if you spend 10 years in Google, you are so used to just having billions of budgets to call GPUs to run whatever models you want. And then you lose the perspective of working with a resource constrained environment. So yeah, there are like all these different things. And I think what's most important is to think about what kind of impact you want, what kind of career you want to build. And whichever choice you choose, there are always additional opportunities, like, I don't know, like volunteering with Hack for Impact, BFE. There are all these like organizations out there that you can take on weekend projects for to sort of like bridge the gap of things that you miss from your full-time work. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on this issue.
Yeah, loved having your perspective on that for sure. Thank you so much. Definitely taking notes for sure. Amazing. That's our last of the moderated questions before we can open up to audience. But at Hack for Impact, we as an organization are definitely working on trying to make sure social impact is at the focus of everything that we're working on. We're working on trying to get more students involved on all fronts within our chapters. And it feels like a lot of the work that you do with the internal tech team and the projects that you all work on work very well in helping the actual work that BFE does work more smoothly, or be able to, people are able to communicate with each other better and things like that. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of the projects that you all work with for the internal tech team and how that bolsters the work that you do with BFE at large.
Sure, definitely would love to. So as I was talking to Zaria before this call, I think I personally see internal tech team as just another sort of tech consulting, but just rather for the internal tech team. I think one thing that's really interesting that we've been building towards as a division is this thing called BFE intranet. So the context is that BFE itself is a non-profit, and before the tech team comes in, was built last year during the pandemic, is pretty much just like a traditional business that's operating on Excel sheets and Word documents, and we have like piles of documents hidden in various corners of our drive that no one goes to look at. It became a crucial issue last year when we hit about 80 to 90 startups, because we have 5 student chapters concurrently working on advising different startups. We have a global mentor network, professionals that are advising our students. We have all these people that are in various parts of the operations, and basically the whole thing becomes really hard to manage if you are just using an Excel sheet alone. So currently we are in the process. Actually, we've just finished all the prototyping and infrastructure setup, and we are going to start this next year, which is to build the first BFE intranet. And what this is basically a platform, internal platform, that allows people to key in data and perform BFE-related operations on there. So part of the products we are planning involves things like startup allocating startups to student teams and to mentors, which involves some of the machine learning algorithms we've built. There are also processes like project management, like startup alumni tracking, all those sort of things. The overall idea is that we are a remote organization by definition because we work with startups, particularly in Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, places that our students are not in. We want to get all the data that they were typing into Google Docs and Excel sheets into our system so that we have a centralized database with things that are best managed that we can easily extract later on for analyzing data. We also want to get people more connected through our platform by having easier means for them to see everyone in the organization, what everyone else is doing across the globe, and be able to chat with people easily. So this is something that to us we think would basically transform the way BFE operates, and what's really going to turn BFE into a tech-driven nonprofit rather than just a consulting organization.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, a lot of that essentially optimization of your organization's workflow. It's really special in just helping the students who are doing this amazing work be able to do it better and do it, with more support. So I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Amazing. So with that, we can switch over to getting our audience questions answered. So we can pull up our first question here from Michael K. How do you measure success with the startups that consult with you?
That's a really great question. So impact tracking is something that that's still to this day an issue that we've been trying to tackle, and is obviously quite tricky in various ways. So the things we have in place is that we have a global impact research division, who's actually also working quite closely with the tech division. And what they do is that after our startups completed engagements with us, we will give them the title startup alumni. And the impact research division currently reaches out to each of the startups every half a year to track their progress, to ask them about whether something we've done in the program sort of turn into things that eventually help the startups. And right now it's a very sort of like manual process. We do get a lot of like really interesting feedback, like the agriculture startup I mentioned just now. So half year after our tech advisory projects, they came back to us and say that they actually filed a patent with the Tanzanian government with the new designs that we helped them build. And previously they were not able to do so with their earlier design because of various technical issues. So that's something that, for example, we will record down as like milestones or like as signals of what we have achieved with the startups. But at the same time, you can see that this is a very manual process. It's very specific to each startup circumstances. There's no way we currently have to sort of like measure our success with each startups or compare the success across the board. Other than, I guess, just feedback submitted by students and startups at the end of the engagement. And we know that for companies, clients we have with, usually takes 1 year or more for any impact to show. So some of the things that we are planning down the road. So the impact research division, I know they have been working with some impact people in the impact investment space to understand what are the common yardsticks people would use to measure, I guess, both the business model and the social impact model of these different clients. They've been trying to distill it down to a list of things that would correlate with the things we help the startup training engagement as well. On the tech end, with our project management tracking system, we are also putting all the things that we've done for the startup in different projects into different categories. So like for this startup, we know for this project, we give them item 1, 2, 3. So it's very easy to track back like which item is the one that maybe helps them win a certain competition, or which advice is the things that they end up not taking at all. So we've been trying to basically on the tech end, we've been trying to building the software things. The impact research team have been looking at a common set of yardsticks, and we are basically in the process of getting these two ends meet and hopefully build a more steady pipeline for startups for us to sort of be able to check the startups.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. It's also very relevant with currently with Hack for Impact and our recent work with trying to measure success with working with our nonprofits as well, and how can we better gather data from our nonprofit partners in that process. So very relevant. Thank you. Amazing.
I think so. One thing I didn't mention is that so with all these like grand ideas we have about tracking data, putting it into practice can actually be quite tricky. One thing we've realized with our years of tracking our startups is also that precisely because we are a pro bono consulting, or once people finish our advisory services, they don't really have a very strong incentives to stay in touch with us. So sometimes we have cases of where we have clients that we can see that so they are still sort of out and about, but they don't reply to our emails anymore, and that basically means we are not able to track anything, or maybe they are no longer willing to supply you with their internal data because their project with BFE or Hack for Impact has ended. So I guess some wild ideas we've been throwing around is basically we are thinking about developing a tool maybe 1 year from now, a tool that allows startups to enter their impact data. And then that tool will automatically generate some sort of social impact report that's vetted by our partners that they can just take and use in their like investment pitches or grant applications. So then there's an incentive for them to like come and report their data through our system because there's something in for them. And then from our end, we will also get them to consent to sharing that data with us anonymously for tracking purposes.
Wow, that's that's great to hear about. That is really special work there, and having it be both for the benefit of the nonprofit or the social enterprise itself, as well as the longevity of the work that you all do. So that's really special. Thank you. For our second audience question here, we have, how do you ensure that once you're done consulting with a startup, that they can continue to maintain the software/tech that you help them create?
Yeah. So I think from the as I've mentioned, one thing we've done at the start is that we do screen our startup requests with really high standards. So startups may enter as a BFA startup to join our generic advisory program, but if they are to submit a technical request to us, we actually view it on a request by request basis, and we may even shoot down requests from startups that are already with us. And very often, what we assess there, besides whether this request is feasible for students to do, we also see whether whatever they are trying to say to get us to build is crucial to the business, i.e. something that they are going to have an active interest in maintaining later on instead of just casting aside. Secondly, whether they themselves have the right people to help maintain these tools. And we actually separate our technical advisory project into two types. One is research only, and the other one is engineering. So for startups that do not have an existing team of people to help maintain whatever tools we're going to build, we will not offer them engineering type projects. So at most, it would be a research type, which is basically involves what I said about producing a report as a roadmap, laying out some different scenarios and saying that if you end up being able to hire this kind of people or end up being able to have this kind of data, this is the next step that you can take. So by that, we sort of, at the very beginning, we already minimizes the sort of risk of people not, startups are not making use of our projects or students' efforts going to waste. At the end of the project, though, especially for engineering projects, we also made sure that our student consultants, so that's like some templates that student consultant or example report student consultants would fill, and we made sure that they have to supply our startups with sort of user manual instructions on how to use the tools. And finally, I think one thing I didn't mention is that in between sort of like the program, because it's a consulting thing, and I believe it's the same for Hyper Impact as well, we do maintain very constant, frequent communication with the startups to make sure that whatever we build is in line with their needs, and we're not just creating something out of the vacuum.
Thank you so much for that answer. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Cool. We have another question here from Mayuki. Do you have any advice in scaling student-led organizations like Hack for Impact, who work with nonprofits to reach to more universities in the U.S. and even overseas?
Thanks. That's a really interesting question. I mean, that's a question we've been grappling with or thinking about all the time as well. So for context, we started from University of Cambridge, right? And we have a very strong UK presence. Our founders were all Singaporeans, so we also have a really strong Singapore presence. And other than that, all our other chapters were built kind of. We basically took a huge risk in building a chapter. Like when we built the New York chapter, it was a friend of our founder who were like posting a post, and someone in New York University said, "Hey, that's interesting, and come on in." And turned out that person is really solid and really loved the work we do, and they are building a whole chapter on its own in NYU. We also have attempts, and more than one attempts that failed. And there's so we are also in the process right now of like creating a more standardized chapter creation sort of guideline. But I think what everyone ends up agreeing is that finding the founder, like the first person in that chapter or that university, is really, really important. It's actually a variety of factors that you look at. It's not just whether this person himself or herself is responsible, committed. You also really need that person to have the right networks and resources to tap into the local community and being able to speak, because that person is going to be the only person that's representing your brand in that community. And I agree, that's like a really tricky issue. We can sometimes do up to 2 months of interviews with someone who's about to start a chapter, and that even that may end up failing at times. But yeah, that's something that we've been also trying to do. And I think making use of personal connections is really important. I mean, obviously, I think there are maybe concerns about not being transparent and independent enough. But I think if you are starting a chapter in a university that you know people are in, at least you have some, I guess, third-party opinions on how the scene is, and that really helps you to navigate a place better, especially if none of the core members are in the university. So I think, yeah, don't underestimate that aspect as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Definitely agree. Something that we've also been grappling with as an organization as well. But yeah, love to hearing your perspective on that as well. Thank you. We have another question here from Michael Chen. Is this an accurate recap of how to get involved? Work in a regular consulting or tech for a while, and then work pro bono part-time or work full-time at an organization like Bridges for Enterprise?
Cool. So I think this is in relation to what I answered for how to go for more impact-focused opportunities, right?
Mhm.
So I think so. What I lay out, I mean, what you lay out here is, I think something I talk about, and I think it's a more typical path for you. I think most people I know at least start with regular consulting or tech. So to get the exposure you have in big companies before specializing or jumping off to new opportunities. But I mean, really the sky is the limit. So don't limit yourself to whatever I've said. I mean, I did my undergrad from 2016 to 2020, and that's already in the past. And even tech or tech consulting itself has changed so much over the 4 years as I was an undergrad. Like I think when I first started tech, this really, at least in London, tech consulting is really not a thing. But right now it's basically everywhere. So I would say don't feel obliged to stick to a like standard recipe. I mean, going with one of these options is safe, and you probably are able to see a lot of opportunities there. But if you see something that allows you to tech consulting for marginalized or like underprivileged community or SMEs, and if it really suits you, go for it. I don't think there's any harm. I do want to emphasize that I think as tech people, we all know that like the nature of a career is such that the things we use changes every now and then. Like every year, there's a new framework coming up. Every year, the sort of paradigm of doing things shifts. So, which is why I was emphasizing that no matter what you do, I think it's quite important to also take on some spare time learnings or projects. And I mean, working with BFE, Hack for Impact is just one example, but you can also just go to GitHub and join some of the open source projects or look out for charities that will need tech support, etc. But basically, having something on the side that helps you keep your mind open to different technologies or different user needs. I think that's really crucial. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah. This other question seems a little bit similar to what you were mentioning really quickly. So what is the reasoning behind focusing on developing countries? I just want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. So I think especially in the early years of BFE, there was a lot of debates on this. I think, first of all, when we started as an organization, we wanted to build our niche, right? So we didn't want to do something that other people are already doing really well at. So in the developed countries, at least from what we've observed in the UK, the government has a lot of initiatives, typically to give funds to social enterprises locally. Cambridge itself, our business school, has like programs to help incubate like this kind of startups with a social mission. So there are already a lot of resources lying around, and I think and there are a lot of consulting companies that are supporting local charities, local social enterprises as well. So when we were starting out, we believe that that's something that's kind of already filled, at least in the UK. Whereas for developing countries, so BFE actually started because our founders in their year one undergrad traveled to Tanzania for a few months over the summer, and he was there as part of the entrepreneurship program to basically help local university students who aspire to be entrepreneurs to help them look at their business models and give them advice and etc. Some of those people actually ended up becoming the first batch of clients for BFE. And that experience was exactly what made him realize at the time that there are all these really amazing people who are trying to do things in their local community, but then the government doesn't have the financial support for them. There's the social enterprises are not as recognized in those countries. Often there's a lack of regulatory support. Also social enterprises are in developing countries were really tricky in the investment space, because if you are even if you are impact-oriented investor, typically you are based in one of the more well-off countries, right? And if, say, I am a London based investor, and then you present to me two charities that are helping with gender inequality, one in the UK, one in France, one in Tanzania. Very often it's the case where people do not have enough knowledge or expertise to understand the market situation in Tanzania.
Mhm.
And the risk of investing there is significantly higher than investing in somewhere that you know. And even if you really want to do it, it may be hard for you to justify this to your stakeholders or people who have the money to do so. So, so they were really put at a disadvantage in the investment space compared to the others. Let alone how there's a lack of curriculum or training opportunities for them to learn about how to properly present to investors, how to talk about their tech products and various things. So, which is why we thought with us coming into this, there's something that we can actually offer to them and something that can actually make a difference.
Wow, thank you so much for that. Wow, definitely as an organization that is more, or even less about us being an organization based in the US mainly, being in tech and working in the US, I feel oftentimes we don't think a lot about how this sort of space, the startup space, operates in other countries, and how the needs of business owners or social enterprise owners can be different based off of what is offered to them. So thank you so much for giving a little bit of a window into what that looks like. And yeah, thank you. We are running a little bit out of time. I do want to sort of get this last question in, if you're okay with that.
Sure.
We have a question here. What are some other organizations that are similar to Bridges for Enterprise?
I mean, I would say none, but there will be a little shameless self-promotion. So I think, I mean, that's partially true that BFE is quite a unique organization. I would say that for when we started as a consulting organization, a very close sort of like organization to us would be 180 DC, 180 degree consulting. I believe they have a lot of branches in the States as well, in the UK, in Singapore, Australia, all over the world. And what they do, I think, is to provide free consulting services for charities and SMEs in each of their local regions. But then they have a very specific focus on business consulting. And then I think, so we also do legal advisory, although that's quite small. And I think there's some pro-bono legal student societies that's usually university bound out there as well. And for tech consulting, I mean, Hack for Impact is actually the organization I could think of that's closest to what we do in terms of tech advisory. I think what makes us quite different is that because we serve a very specific niche of clients, and everything we've been doing has been sort of oriented about how to help them provide the most value to them, which is why we have this incubation program that covers all these different branches of things, and we have a really strong internal team that's supporting the program as well. So we've talked about the technology team we have that's building the internal products and doing internal analytics. We talk about the impact research team that's helping us analyze post-engagement impact. What I didn't mention is that we actually also have a really strong sort of communication marketing team. And we have a team that's called Startup Recruitment that's basically in charge of screening the several hundreds of startups that's coming into us every year. As in that's applying to us every year. So I think, yeah, I mean, this ends up being a really shameless plug of how we are really unique. But I think it really depends on what you want to get involved. If you want to do like tech stuff, I think Hack for Impact is sounds a really great organization you can work with. We are also quite different, right? In that I think in our case, our clients are often really far away from us, and they live in a completely different sort of local context than where we are. So like, for example, when we are building softwares for them, oftentimes we need to be mindful of how most people in Africa, for example, only use their mobile phones to access the internet, and that has a lot of implications on what we can do. And we need to be wary about low bandwidth scenarios, for example, etc. And also we don't get to talk to them sort of like in person very often. Whereas if you work for an organization like Hack for Impact, I imagine there's a lot more closer collaboration you can have, or a lot more local knowledge you have about that particular client. So really, it depends on what you want, and I'm sure there's always something out there for you.
To continue the Bridges for Enterprise plug here, I know we sent some opportunities for projects and mentorship that you all have extended to our community. I don't know if you want to take a little bit of time to explain a little bit more about that or discuss.
Yes, definitely. So, I mean, right now we are basically looking for, we currently have 3 types of openings. The first one, we are actually getting coding assessments up really soon. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to look at it and apply by this weekend. It's basically React Django developers that we are recruiting for this BFE intranet that we mentioned. So what we've been doing for the past year was we did a lot of product planning by our excellent product managers. We've built out the UI prototypes, and our DevOps people have been building all the infrastructure, Docker servers that are required for the whole development process, as well as databases. And right now, basically, we are down to the software development stage, and we have about 4 to 5 projects globally. There's a big project, but there are 4 to 5 sub-projects scattered across the globe for people to join and develop parts of the intranet. You will get to, I guess, interact with a lot of developers across different physical locations. And also, you will also get to understand a lot about how BFE operates as an organization, because the things that you do will be very core to the operation of BFE. There are 2 other openings. So very briefly, the first one, I think we are looking for a mentor for an SEO project, search engine optimization. That's basically a data analytics project that's currently run by some Cambridge students, and they are basically looking at analyzing website traffic data into BFE and what that means in terms of the startups typically that are visiting us from across the world, and they are using that data to inform on how we can best spend our Google Ads budget to target specific locations in the world and to make our services more sort of available to the countries that we are not addressing yet. It's called search engine optimization. We're basically looking for someone who has more experience in data analytics and digital marketing. And finally, we are also looking for what we call sysadmin volunteer, so someone to help our cybersecurity manager to look at management of our Azure infrastructure. And you will have so it's a lot about learning about the cloud and looking at IT policies, user permissions, security issues, and you may also have the chance to learn about application security as well. And our cybersecurity manager is actually based in the States. He's a assistant vice president in network security in Bank of America, based in New Jersey. So if you join us, then you do not need to suffer from all the time zone differences that you will experience with other parts of BFE.
Thank you so much for sharing with that. For anyone who wasn't aware, we do have links to all of these opportunities in the Slack, and we'll make sure to get those to you for sure. But with that, we are all out of time. So thank you so much, Kevin, for speaking with us today. Thank you for everyone for your amazing questions. Fantastic discussion. We'll be hosting speaker events monthly. Our next one will be in late January, but if you can't wait until late January, we have a Bytes of Good podcast as well. So if you're interested in that, you can head to bytesofgood.org. The recording of this event will also be up on our YouTube afterwards, so you can go back and look back at all of the great nuggets of information that Kevin provided with us. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much again for everyone who came and tuned in. Thank you again, Kevin.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Daria, and thank you, Hack for Impact, for having me today.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're so happy to have you. So see everyone back in January. So thank you.
Thanks.